pretty much a discussion for everyone to just like talk and learn. And so that's the point of it. Yeah, Ben, if you could switch the slides.
Yeah. If we want to introduce ourselves quickly, Mr. Chris talked about this a little bit, but I'm Ben Erdman. I'm going to be a senior at Strake next year. Do y'all want to?
Yeah, I'm Ben Golden. I'm going to be a junior next year.
And I'm Zion Dixon. I'll also be a junior at Strake next year.
All right. And so what we're going to start with is the history of Black Lives Matter. We feel that a lot of the discussions surrounding what's happening right now have a lack of understanding of what Black Lives Matter is, what it means, what it stands for, etc. So this first slide here talks about the history of Black Lives Matter, the movement, the organization, that whole thing. It was created in 2013 by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi in 2013 in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman. If you don't know, George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin, was acquitted, and went on to do things like sign Skittles bags and auction off the gun that he killed Trayvon Martin with. And there was a severe lack of justice in this case specifically, which led to the creation of Black Lives Matter. The organization initially acted as a way to identify and call out anti-Black racism. So it was initially more of a focus on calling out the instances of anti-Black racism and the way that they affected our justice system. But then in 2014, they organized their first kind of major event, which was the Black Lives Matters Ride. They gathered 600 people driving from where they were to Ferguson after Mike Brown's death. Mike Brown was also killed by the police, and it was the first major Black Lives Matter event. Following this event specifically, there were 18 Black Lives Matter chapters founded across the country. And today, there are over 30 local Black Lives Matter chapters, though the movement and the three leaders have talked about how they don't really attempt to police who is and isn't a part of the movement. Rather, they recognize that there are individual groups that are in line with their values and who are kind of part of what they're trying to fight for. One other thing I thought I forgot to mention is if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please save them for the end. We'll take any questions you have, but we're just going to get through this part first. Rather than go through each of the specific policies that Black Lives Matter supports and advocates for, there are basically 13 guiding principles. And all of these principles inform and influence the way that Black Lives Matter operates. So there are 13 principles that are on the right side of the screen. They're kind of small, so I'll read the names of them in a moment. But it's important to note that these inform everything from action regarding police brutality to other parts of their platform, such as the end of Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. There are tons of different things that Black Lives Matter supports, but they all stem from these 13 main principles, which I think is a good place to start if you want to understand why Black Lives Matter supports what they do. Those principles are, if it's too small to see, collective value, restorative justice, Black women, queer affirming, Black family, transgender affirming, diversity, intergenerational, loving engagement, unapologetically Black, and Black villages. And those are what Black Lives Matter uses to inform its platform and everything that it does. So that's an understanding of what Black Lives Matter, the organization, is. And this is more of an understanding of, this slide talks more about maybe not the organization Black Lives Matter. Well, it is tied to it, but something you might have seen in like hashtag Black Lives Matter, in social discussions of Black Lives Matter. And I know you're not supposed to make a presentation by just like writing everything down and reading off the slides, but I think this is something that's important to both see and hear, because one of the biggest sources of ignorance in discussions of Black Lives Matter is just a misunderstanding of what the term means. So I'm going to read through this, read along with me, listen, whatever you need to do. But Black Lives Matter has never meant that Black Lives matter more or that only Black Lives matter. Rather, it's a recognition of this systemic and Black permeate society. Society tells us that Black officers, in cases of police brutality, when it continues a war on drugs that was started as a way to demonize Black communities, when people worry more about Target's insurance money than police brutality, when the institutions that we attend and we support fail to speak out in current times and fail to deal with what's happening, etc. Black Lives Matter is a recognition of a fact that many of us in our daily lives disavow and take actions that are antithetical to this fact, whether we know it or not. And so Black Lives Matter is a crucial recognition of something that seems like a basic fact, but is something that we're told is false every single day. So that's important to remember when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and specifically when people try to distance the conversation by saying things like all lives matter. Black Lives Matter was created specifically as a way for communities and individuals to talk about Black life and to talk about Black communities, and that is its purpose. So next, Ben is going to talk about how you can help.
Yeah, so next is how you can help, because I think the first question I had personally when the Black Lives Matter movement started picking up a lot of recognition and people started paying a lot of attention, obviously my first thought was like how I can help, right? And it was and so basically these are some like guidelines that we put out for ways that you can help, but you always have to remember that outside of what we tell you, there are always ways that you personally can help, whether it's education or discussion. So don't feel limited to what we tell you here, but definitely these are some good guidelines. So first is protest. Like, what are ways you can protest, right? First, you can go to actual protests. Information in Houston protests are all over Black Lives Matter Facebook. The hashtag Black Lives Matter right now is actually being used as almost a news feed for what's going on. Other organizations also organize protests. Grassroots is really big, grassroots law. So there are a lot of places you can just pretty much look up and get involved. Stay safe, wear a mask and bring water. If you're gonna go to these protests, obviously like social distancing is still important. We want you to be safe. And if you can't go to the protests because that is like a big problem, there are other ways to help. One of the ways is you can sign petitions, which are really good. We'll go over that later. But there are a lot of other ways to protest that I think people don't ever think about. So they feel limited to the option of like going to a protest, and then they're like, well, I guess if I can't go to a protest, I can't do anything, and then I shouldn't help. But that is like the opposite of what we actually need. We need you to help. And then for non-Black people at protests, it's important to remember what the protest is about. So non-Black people shouldn't be censoring their voices and distracting from the purpose of the protest. Remember, like, it's a Black Lives Matter protest. You're there to help, but it isn't your protest. And secondly, your goal is to support the movement, not to feel better about yourself, right? A big problem we're seeing right now is that, like, I think one of the worst examples of this was like 12 million people posted on the hashtag Blackout Tuesday, which was like where they would post like a black screen, and 12 million people actually signed the petition for like justice for George Floyd, which means that half of the people that were like posting these social media stuff like didn't really care and like didn't actually know like what we were campaigning for. And that's the problem we want to fix, right? We want these people to like, we want you to show your representation, but we want it to make an impact too. And also use your privilege. If police are too violent, you can get in between them and other protesters. Remember, if you're not Black, you do have like a privilege that you can use to assist them. If you want to go to the next slide, then. Donate. So if you aren't able to protest and go to the protest because you're worried about getting corona, or you can't, or your parents won't let you, donations are a huge way to help. But you have to know how to donate correctly. So you got to support programs that support racial justice and equality. I know Ben talked about this earlier, but Black Lives Matter has 13 values, and they also like recognize other organizations with similar values that they align with. And they put that if you go onto the Black Lives Matter website, they'll outline those for you. So you can donate to Black Lives Matter. Another really good one is the Equal Justice Initiative, which provides legal representation to people who have been wrongly convicted or unfairly sentenced. They've worked on every campaign from George Floyd. They're currently working on Breonna Taylor. I encourage you to donate. Mutual aid funds are really big too. This is something a lot of people don't know about. They address homelessness and systemic inequalities by offering things like community assistance, which is food, finance, to actually help the Black community from the bottom up. And many are now focusing on helping those struggling because of coronavirus, which does disproportionately affect those in the Black community. So that is another part of another issue that Black Lives Matter is trying to address. And then donate to help protesters. Bail funds like Act Blue in Minnesota and the Minnesota Freedom Funds try to free protesters, primarily Black protesters, if they can. So these are just like way to help if you have money, but if you don't, then the next slide. Okay, this is the last one, is educate yourself and have different conversations. So this kind of circles back to my initial point, which was just that spreading information is is probably one of the biggest ways you can help. And this meeting is kind of us trying to do that. And from this meeting, whatever you take away is also good to spread. So lasting change is never going to happen without actively deconstructing our beliefs about race, right? We pretty much live in this society that's ingrained in this racist ideology. And we need to make economic change in a society. To make those change, people need to be actively racist, and the best way to start is educating. So reading is really good. Ta-Nehisi Coates' memoir, Between the World and Me, and there's a children's version. These are really good books to read if you ever have the chance. Documentaries are really good. I think some of the best that really moved me were The 13th by Ava DuVernay, and it basically walks through mass incarceration to the 13th Amendment. And then Whose Streets is also a really good one. These are just more things that if like, let's say you don't know a lot about how the movement started, or what police brutality really is, or why the movement got its ground, I think those are really good documentaries to watch, because they're really informative, and they can teach you a lot about that. But I think the most important part is have conversations, and that's kind of what we're trying to articulate through this meeting, is that we want everyone should go out and educate themselves. This is the last way to support, is petitions. Sign petitions online. If you just Google hashtag Black Lives Matter Google Doc petition, there's a petition that Black Lives Matter has compiled all of the petitions you can sign. So you can go there, and you can also email Representative Grassroot Laws has a lot of options for you to do this. But I think the biggest thing is that there's always ways to help. And so if you want to, we encourage you to go and take action and help your community. Finally, is supporting Black-owned businesses. So right now, already Black-owned businesses have trouble securing loans and have issues, specifically right now, accessing federal aid program designed for coronavirus. So if you read this study, it's basically talking about this national survey of 500 African-American and Latinx small-owned businesses, found that only 12% received full assistance that they request, and 2/3 reported that they didn't see anything. This is basically saying that like Black businesses are already underprivileged, and right now it's getting worse because they don't have access to the same funds as other businesses. So if you go out and buy from these restaurants or stores, it also helps the community a lot. So you can look, the Houston Chronicle has a really good list. If you just Google Black-owned businesses in Houston, there'll also be a good list. But yeah, anyway, Tal. And I think we'll turn over to Zion for some frequently asked questions.
All right. So next is that I've seen a lot of the same questions arise as I've been active on social media and in light of recent events. So answer to some of those common questions. One is, obviously the main one is about rioting. People find themselves struggling to see something good or meaningful with the protest because of how it's broken out into riots. So my answer to that is that Rioting historically has been a response to injustice and inequality, and it's just not just from Black people, but from America rebelling against Britain, to the women's suffrage movements, to Stonewall for the LGBTQ plus community. This is rather a typical response to an overwhelming amount of violence and oppression of certain groups. And for far too long, movements and groups have tried to be peaceful. Notably, Super Bowl quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who lost his job and got nationwide hate from his peaceful protests of taking a knee during the national anthem. And the criticism of peaceful protest shows that the problem that people have is rather with the idea of speaking up to resist and demand for change, not the type of protest. Black Americans have felt helpless, desperate, and angry, and have had enough of the violence and oppression dating back to centuries. And that results in the destruction of things like communities and countries which have always denied your own humanity and civil rights. The fact that the whole notion of rioting is that Black people feel like there is nothing else to do to be heard. Otherwise, they wouldn't be resorting to such violence immediately. Another point is that lives have more value than property and cannot be rebuilt as a business or wealth can. And the overwhelming concern for these businesses in preserving the capitalist infrastructure of America that we see through the media, through social media, through people's perspectives, proves the point that America and its people care more about money and people over Black lives. What this means is that focusing and being uncomfortable with the type of resistance instead of the reason for resistance is why we continue to see this outrage. And until people understand and realize why we are resisting and why it is coming in such a form, then it will continue. And lastly is I find myself when I'm in discussions with on social media with non-Black people throw in Martin Luther King as some sort of like, I guess, argument to like disprove why the validity of riots. However, my argument is that toward the end of Dr. King's life, he began to understand and realize the reason and effectiveness of violent rebellions, even saying a riot is the language of the unheard. Black people are being unheard and have been unheard. And so even the man who non-Black people like to praise as a peaceful activist recognized and understood why sometimes riots would happen and were necessary to gain the attention and apply pressure. Another common question I get is, isn't the media making it seem worse than it is? My question easily is that no. If anything, the media is sugarcoating it, and it's a form of fake allyship. The media over allocates attention to riots and energize people at the riots to depict the image that they want in your eyes. If you go to protests and rallies, you see the love and peace and frustration amongst everyone, where people are quite literally begging for peace from the protesters and aggressive police force. I myself have been in many protests, and no one is trying to get violent initially. They're asking each other and asking the police to be peaceful. But countless amount of police abuse, violence, and murders throughout history, even during the protests, either ever get the media attention or is blown over within a few days under their own watch. For example, for days, CNN replayed the video of an old white man being forcefully pushed to the ground and injured by police, despite dozens of other incidents and even deaths of police force and violence nationwide. My answer to that is that private journalism and social media pages of activists stay up to date on the daily realities of brutal police incidents nationwide. Any response to a violent struggle lasting decades and even centuries can never be an overreaction, whether it's from the media or the people taking to the streets for protesting. Something else that's not necessarily a common question, but is important to understand is qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is basically a legal doctrine that makes it nearly impossible to sue police for abuse, excessive force, and misconduct, making it extremely hard for justice and accountability to be seen from police brutality and misconduct, which is why time and time again we see cases where police either get off free or get off with minimal charges, minimal punishments, because it is qualified immunity that basically gives them protection for violence and misconduct. Now, a question I get a lot from my youth friends and on social media is, what does social media activism even do? A lot of people are hesitant to repost or get into the social media activism because they may not think it does anything. However, it raises awareness on current issues, and it encourages and increases youth activism and involvement. It is a great source to spread ways to help, such as protest donations, emailing, calling public officials, and petitions like Ben explained. Myself and many other youth have learned new things, gotten updates on current news, and found ways to be involved through social media, and it's becoming hard to go unnoticed. And I encourage kids and I encourage you to continue to participate in activism this way, as that's what we see the most. Lastly is that how should you listen and have conversations with Black people and Black friends? And how should you go about this with your non-Black friends and family? My response is that you should be an active listener, pay attention to the experiences and the perspectives of a Black person without trying to jump in or rather explain your side and make it about how you view things. Because at that point, it becomes back to devaluing and delegitimizing the realities of Black person in America, which obviously isn't productive. And it's not going to be able to foster change if you're not open to listening how Black people who experience racism and experience anti-Blackness, how they feel about it. You should be open and eager to learn and change your ways of perspectives of things. Do some research, reading, and discussing to dig on your own, dig deeper on what is going on and what has been going on in America. With non-Black people, you should discuss ways you have seen racial privilege, experienced it, and participated in some form of anti-Blackness. Because yes, everyone is complicit in some way, shape, or form. And ask each other questions about current events, past events, and seek ways to make a difference, speaking out against racial injustice and inequality, like we're trying to do here. So lastly for the presentation is what to do next. As media coverage obviously is going to move on to something else, protests will slow down and social media feeds go back to normal. It's important now not to let up because or become comfortable in how things are, and to rather go back to how things used to be. Ways to continue to make a difference include, but are not limited to, reading and educating yourself about racial issues and Black revolutionary texts, continuing to donate to specific funds and signing petitions, normalize supporting your local Black businesses. I cannot stress that enough. Seek out sources of information to stay up to date on what is going on year round, because the media picks and chooses when they give racial issues coverage and attention. But rather, like I said, through private journalism, social media activists, I can quite literally tell you that this is a fight that people are going through year round. And lastly, is that for those of age and who are able to, it is very important to vote, and to vote for people who have agendas for like political change as far as police brutality. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Alzine to introduce our special guest.
You're on mute, Mr. Alzine.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Is Merv here somewhere?
I'm here. I'm muted.
All right.
All right, you're good now.
I apologize. Thank you again for that excellent presentation, sir. You've given us many things to think about. Let me introduce now our guest. Our guest is Professor Alex Vitale. He's an SJ graduate of the class of 1983. Presently, he's Professor of Sociology and coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. He took his bachelor's from Hampshire College, his PhD from the City University Graduate Center in 2001 in sociology. You go on and on. His areas of expertise have been literally in the area of criminology, sociology of law, policing, the interface between police and community. He's been very much an advocate for change and for reform of these very fundamental kinds of reform in these particular areas. So without further ado, I give you Professor Alex Vitale.
Thank you, Mervyn, and thanks so much to the students who pulled this together and pulled this presentation together. And it was really very exciting and inspiring for me to see the level of engagement with such an important issue. This was not a topic of concern, or I should say, a frequent conversation when I was at SJ in the early 80s. And, we're in a very challenging, demanding, and also exciting moment right now. And I've been, very honored to be able to kind of play a role in shaping that conversation on a national and international stage. My book, The End of Policing, I had the deal to write that book before Ferguson happened, before the death of Tamir Rice or Eric Garner. And I had no idea that we were getting ready to embark on a sustained movement for racial justice that had at its center, a concern about our over-reliance on policing and the role that the criminal justice system plays in reproducing racial inequality. And that's really been a central theme in my work, that policing and prisons are not just neutral institutions for enforcing laws that automatically benefit everyone equally. that the procedurally proper, lawfully appropriate, non-racially biased reliance on policing still places a burden on the policed. That the criminal justice system, even when it works, does so by diminishing people. And we've come to rely on it to address every social problem under the sun, especially in our most vulnerable communities, our poorest, our Black and brown communities, homeless populations, folks who are experiencing mental health crises without adequate insurance, folks who are having substance abuse problems. These things have been turned over to the police to manage. I'm pleased to see that the framing that's being used here today is not just about policing, because it's clear that this movement is not just about policing. When we look back at the political upheavals of the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the riots and protests, while many of them were triggered by abuses of policing, we understand today that those were not just about policing. And so that means that we need an analysis of this moment and a set of demands that speak to these larger issues. And I think that's one of the real challenges facing this movement, is how to move beyond discussions of police reform or even defunding the police, and towards a kind of positive vision of how to create greater racial justice in our society. So how do we go about doing that? I certainly don't have all the answers to that, and it's not really my place to have all the answers to that. We need to have a more robust conversation within this movement, led by communities of color, in articulating an economic, cultural, social program that they think will lead to greater racial equality in the United States. And it has to touch on all these elements. I think one of my concerns about the sometimes single-minded focus on policing is that it doesn't create the space to talk about core issues of economic justice. One of the biggest problems in reproducing racial inequality in the United States right now is the way we fund education, based primarily on local property taxes, when we live in a segregated society where communities don't have equal ability to raise funds to pay for their educational services. So I think one of the most important demands of any new racial justice movement has to be a rethink about how educational services are provided, and guaranteeing not just equality of funding, but actually we need more funding for those communities that have historically suffered from inadequate services, inadequate resources, inadequate schools. And the approach over the last several decades has been to turn the problem of failed schools over to the police to manage, to put more resources into policing instead of counselors and social workers and high quality after school programs and teacher supports, et cetera. So I don't want to talk for too long. I'm really happy to hear the kinds of questions that are, on people's minds as we try to work through how to support this movement. So I'll stop there and happy to take some questions.
Real quick, I'd just like to say thank you a lot for joining us. We appreciate it a ton.
Sure.
I'd like to encourage all of you to go read The End of Policing. I know a few of us have been working through it the past few days. Mr. Chris specifically has very high praise for The End of Policing, and it's definitely very important right now. Just so you, some framework for asking questions. We're happy to hear any and all of your questions. I'm not quite sure how long that will take, but just keep in mind that we're here to answer your questions, and we'll get to you eventually. Other than that,
you want to just send a message in the chat if you have a question or something, or raise your hand maybe. I think, yeah.
And just so folks know, I do have an event at the end of the hour. So we have until I believe it's 11 a.m. your time.
Yeah, so if you have questions for Professor Vital, maybe ask those closer to the beginning. Mr. Azine, do you want to go, and then Mr.
I've had the pleasure of reading about half your book so far, Professor. And the one thing that stands out, there's so many things that you indicate that need to be done. You have the power today. I'm just giving the power to make the first initial change you think will make a difference right now in people's lives that'll push us forward. If you want to do one thing to help start the change process, what would that be?
Well, it would be between getting police out of schools and getting police out of the mental health business. I think these are the two obvious low-hanging fruit, and we're seeing a lot of progress on the mental health and school policing front. So let's just maybe just take 1 second to talk about maybe the mental health front. We closed down the state hospitals over the last 40, 50 years and told people that we would create community-based services so that people could live independently and not in these asylums. But those community-based services never really materialized, and people have not had access to good quality care. Usually they're given some pills which have side effects and need to be constantly monitored, and they're kind of left on their own. And then when they have a crisis, it's an armed police officer that responds. And they, no matter how much training we try to give them, they're just not the right tool for that problem. And between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis. So a number of cities in response to this movement, and not just from the last few weeks, but this has been going on for years, pressure to try to get police out of this. And I think we're going to see a big movement across the country to create alternative crisis response capacities and to build up these community-based mental health services. And that's going to save a lot of lives.
Thank you.
Mrs. Othan, do you want to go next?
Okay. Really, I had a couple of questions because one was I just responded that I'm very interested in helping you guys on campus. I've been wanting to help more in this way since I started at Strake, but will fully admit it's a difficult topic to address, being white and saying, let me help you. But I think it almost takes someone like me up and say, let's do something. The racial injustice on campus has to change, and it has to come in an educated and in way. So I want to help, and I don't know 100% how to help. So that's part of what I wanted to ask you, was that I need to further educate myself in a way that beyond my life experience, which most of you don't know my life experience, but I grew up Third Ward in Houston's. I have a weird perspective.
Yeah.
But I need education as an adult that will further help me not only to, so I'm interested in the book that you guys were talking about, which I of course have not read, and further books or ways that you can help me to be better educated so that I can answer questions and be more educated for all on this perspective. In supporting not just the Black students and the Black community at Strake, but as a human, you know. So I'm very interested, and I think that a strange perspective that I don't know if it's written about, and that's what I want to know, is how, you know, we, the white people in America, can better support the Black community. Besides just being there physically, like you were talking about, and allowing my presence to support. But now if I go to Strake and stand with you, how do I make it clear the perspective and How do we come across in a way that is non-threatening, right? Because you know as well as I know that white people feel threatened. And so how do you change that, and how can I better educate myself to make that happen?
Well, that's not exactly my expertise. So I think you need to, embark on a set of conversations within the institution about how to do that. I would maybe just as a brief thing recommend looking at Michelle Alexander's op-ed in the New York Times from about a week ago, which I think lays out the challenge before us, recommends some readings and some ways of thinking about this moment. But that is work for someone other than me.
I think we can talk about that briefly. I think from the looks of it, I think we all have had something to say about that question specifically. So I'll start, I guess. I just have two quick things. First, on the question of what it means to be white and deal with issues specifically at Strake, I think there's some good reading out there by George Yancey. He writes about what it means to be Black in white spaces and what it means to be Black around white people, which is something that I think is a good thing to read and definitely made me think, for lack of a better term. So I think that's a good place to start. And then on the other question, or another part of your question about how you can help, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is a lack of institutional support. We have Mr. Christ here, we have Mr. Azin here, we had Mr. Scheller here, we have you here, but we invited the administration, and I haven't seen any of them yet, at least. We've seen a lack of them saying much about what's happening right now. I know there have been requests to do simple things like ban Confederate flags on campus, and they've said that they'll think about it. So I think the biggest way that teachers specifically can help is helping with institutional support, because there are students, there are groups on campus that want to deal with these things. But as you said, it's hard to deal with those things in the environment that we have, and more institutional support, specifically from teachers, is very helpful. Zion and Ben.
And I think, Ben brings up a really good point when he talks about like the administration at Strake. There's a real lack of not only like the education of the administration, but a lot of their attitude towards the injustices. It's really just a gross lack of, I think, even like recognition of these issues. And I think that the first part is like education. I know we keep kind of pushing that, but I think the most commonly repeated, probably a thing I hear is that racism is really ingrained in America today. It's ingrained in like how people think, right? And that's a big problem. So I think because of Strake's, because of their location and who goes to school there, there's a huge lack of this education of racial insensitivity or problems or anything. So I think that the first step is educating the body and the teachers and like literally anyone we can get our hands on to realize what's going on, and then hopefully we can make a connection and change the administration. But right now we're kind of working with straws. So it's really about like uniting and like getting everyone together and spreading that kind of message that something needs to change. And that's what we're missing. And that's this particular meeting is a huge step in that direction. But I think what we need to do is we need to make this a very commonly talked about issue and addressed issue on campus, which it is not. And I think that's a problem.
So my perspective, as a Black student at Strake, me and my friends have had our fair share of like problematic racial experiences at Strake, from students to teachers to the administration. And even last year when we had a presentation from the Black Student Union during Black History Month, addressing the like stereotypes and problematic things that Black kids go through at Strake every day, it became a joke amongst the student body. And I quickly noticed that after. And I think that it takes a teacher or a couple teachers to take initiative amongst the adults to rather address this as less of a one-off issue, like things like calling Black kids the N-word. This is not like a one-time thing, but rather a part of a lot of things that have been going on for not just even like the time I've been at Strake, but for decades at Strake. And so to realize that it's not a one-off issue, it's not just something small, but it's part of a larger problematic problem that Strake Jesuit has participated in. And it takes a teacher, a couple teachers to begin that discussion and begin that focus amongst the adults and amongst the administration, because us kids no longer feel, I guess, safe or comfortable, or even like find any point in trying to like tell teachers or administration about the things that we go through day by day at Strake, because ultimately nothing is done, and it just gets blown off, and like it gets blown off. And so these discussions with teachers to teachers, teacher administration, and teachers to students, all of this needs to happen, and not just like a couple times once again, but it needs to continuously happen until we're actively seeing things getting better, seeing it being addressed. But it's definitely has to do with accountability, and I think pushing for that as well. Is that I think that teachers see a lot of things going on, but they don't really do much, or either are afraid to speak up, or they don't speak up, whether it's to the administration, to the students. And so just the little things like that, putting people in check, it shows that you don't want this to be a space where racial injustices can just go on and not be addressed or not be taken seriously.
I think, Noah, you have your hand up. If you want to ask the question, and then also just tell us who it's directed at, that might help a little bit too.
Okay. This is actually Noah's Chad Benson Allen. Just had a quick comment where the teacher was asking like what they could do or what she could do. And one of the things that I've seen is that passive response is really what the real issue is. And I think much like Zion had mentioned, much like you'd mentioned, allowing those microaggressions to continue without being checked, like you said, is the start of the issue. It's what gets it woven into the fabric, the understanding or the thought that, oh, this can slide, oh, that's okay. Or like, you continue, kids, but people continue to press the envelope and see how far they can go. But when you shut it down and you and set a tone that that's not acceptable and not allowed, it helps with changing the direction. The second part is, instead of just griping to gripe, or like we said, making this an emotional response of people are upset right now, but getting these issues on the agenda of the school so that the Father Johnson, so that Dean Healy are aware, and they get this, and they make this a part of a response for the school. Like being upset just to be upset does get you a little bit of anger, does get you only so far, where we have to actually procedurally address this stuff, get on the agenda, get the ear of Father Johnson, get the ear of Dean Healy, and help them understand that this is a problem. This isn't a knee-jerk reaction. This isn't something that we're just responding to in the moment. It's an actual problem that we need to address. So those type of things, that type of support, and like we said, negating and shutting down those microaggressions helps in the process. It helps to show, hey, this teacher is an ally. This teacher is in support of the effort. This teacher is helping me, as well as when doing it in non-mixed company. So when the teachers are in the teacher's lounge, and I don't know if this happened, but if someone is saying something that is incorrect, correcting them, showing them better, instead of passively, I don't want to get involved. Well, that's how they think. That's the problem that has to be fixed. Thanks for giving me the moment, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think something important to gather from a lot of this is that the reason we're doing this meeting and not just kind of sitting back and doing nothing is because I think we see the ability to change. I think if we push hard enough, we can probably educate enough people to push and make a difference. And I think that is probably why we're working so hard at what we do, is because we see that there is a chance at maybe bettering something, and that's why we're trying so hard, and that's why we're trying to spread education. And so I think that it's important it's important to kind of keep up this constant like fight for equality and stopping these microaggressions, because it is kind of it's sad that it happens, and it shouldn't happen. Like, I don't know why it happens, but it does. And I think that's something that needs to
All right, I think there's.
I just wanted to say one last thing about that, because I think you boys, I've taught most of you that are in this room, in this group today. I'm pretty sure you guys know that I'm an ally. I don't know. I'm pretty outspoken with students of any race about saying inappropriate things or microaggressions towards anyone. I don't agree with or put up with that kind of thing, and never have. So that's great. And I don't know how often that happens around campus, but I do know that I've personally received pushback from some students when I do end microaggressions. And I guess that's part of the education I'm seeking, right? Like, how do I know the right way to handle? And the pushback I've received has actually been from my Black students when I've ended an aggression in the classroom. And that is the part where I go, I don't know what to do, because I won't allow aggressions to be said in my room. But when I receive a pushback from a Black student who tells me that I shouldn't have stopped it, or that what I'm doing is useless, that's where I'm broken. That's where I'm crushed, right? Like, I want to be the person that stands up and says, this is wrong. We're not going to do these kinds of things. And then when I get told not to do it by a student, then I'm in a weird place. I'm never going to stop. But I the right way to do it, so that I don't make things worse, right? Like, that's how I've been told, that I'm just making things worse. And that's where I'm like, what do I do then? So that's where I'm listening to you, hear you, and I want to do it right, but I need to know how. Or I need to not listen to people telling me I'm doing the wrong and just keep doing it, right? But that's what I have done, but I don't know.
Sure.
So
in regards to that, something that I've noticed as a Black student at Strake who's outspoken, speaks out about things like racial injustice, whether it's on social media, in person, a lot. I too get pushback from my Black peers about caring so much, about speaking out so much, about making it all about race, like whatever that means. And I think that that's part of the environment at Strake, where Black students have been taught that that's just the norm, and we have become comfortable, are forced to become comfortable with the way that things are and uncomfortable with changing how things are. And so I noticed that as I try to seek change and try to speak out, try to hold classmates accountable, I too get that pushback. And it's difficult as it's difficult because obviously people are not going to agree with the things that, like, as someone who's like trying to push for change as a student, people are not going to always agree with me or like how I do it or what I'm doing. And so I'll lose friends to the process or get pushback from non-Black students or backlash. But I know that not everyone is willing to put themselves out there as far as like pushing back against what they're seeing, against their own peers, holding their own classmates and peers accountable and talking to them. And so I think that too is just part of the environment that we've been used to at the campus. And I think that addressing the bigger issues like we talked about through discussions, through the students, through discussions with administration and teachers, is able to change that environment. And so people feel more comfortable with seeing people be held accountable, seeing people pushing back against racial microaggressions, because at this point, people are not comfortable with that. And that, I guess that speaks volume that people aren't even comfortable with an environment where you call out racism.
Yeah, I think Zion's 100% correct in that it is an environment where people no longer feel comfortable or almost feel like uncool when they like stop something like a racist like joke, like, oh no dude, it's funny, like that is like something that like can start and like a bunch of people are just okay with that, but it's not, and it just takes like 2 or 3 people to be like, what are you doing, to kind of stop that. And I think that's the point of education, which is what we're trying to spread.
Sure,
Yes.
Mr. Rossi.
A couple of comments. One, you mentioned in your presentation, Hassan, about the entire part of rioting and all the rest. One of my expertise over the last 20 years has been political messaging and everything else. And I must say, be careful, in my opinion, be careful about embracing rioting. They want to make about rioting. That right away is going to get you problems in terms of the broader conversation. It's about seeking social justice. Turns out that when people seek social justice, things go badly sometimes. That's not the heart of what's going on. What's going on, people asking for justice in the most American way you can think of. They're demonstrating in the streets. What I'm saying simply is not, I think you're right in your comment of where it came from, but in presenting ourselves and trying to build a movement, build a support movement, to talk the language of political persuasion. And that starts off with a strong core value, American value of protest, of seeking our rights. You don't have to apologize for the rioters. They're not part of who we are in many ways. They might be a consequence of it, might be a symptom of the problem, but they're not, as far as I'm concerned, they're not part of the people that try to make the change. That's just me. That's my opinion. Second thing I want to say is this. Individual teachers can make a difference. I know that to be a fact. Long ago, I made a promise to myself. My classroom will be a safe place for discussion of all sides, of all points of view. Doesn't mean I sit back and listen to everything. I intervene. I intervene by asking questions, by having kids talk to each other. Again, I have found a simple example, driving while black. I've had kids who look at me like they don't know what the hell I'm talking about when I say that expression. But again, once I raise the expression, the discussion gets going. Black students chime in about their experiences. I talk about my own son's experiences being driving while poor in Memorial, for example. In other words, we don't have to revolutionize the world to start making a change. If individual teachers can be motivated to do so, classrooms are a great place for engaging in this issue in a sane, civil way and making change as far as I'm concerned. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right. We're looking through the chat at the moment, looking at some of y'all's questions there as well, which we'd like to answer real quick. Someone asked if we've considered presenting this to the whole student body. We haven't talked about that specifically, though I don't think any of us would be opposed to that idea. It might just be a matter of what we talked about before, a matter of institutional support and whether or not we could get that opportunity in the first place. But I don't think any of us would be opposed to that. Somebody asked about reading material, suggesting reading material for English and history classes. I know that this is something that this might not be something that we have as much control over, but I think it's definitely a way that we could try to help. I know that, for example, reading Huck Finn sophomore year is always something that we have lengthy conversations about in our classes. And it's still kind of something that's up to debate about whether or not we should be doing that, and stuff like that. So I think that definitely is somewhere that we could help out. I'm not sure to what impact necessarily that would have, but that's definitely something that we can look into, and I appreciate that suggestion.
As far as like reading material, I found that actually helpful and also like kind of not helpful at the same time. So this year in English, we read had discussions and read numerous books and literature about Harlem Renaissance, Black authors, Black perspectives, and of course, Huck Finn. And I think that another big problem that Black students and Black parents have had with Strake, and it's not even just Strake, it's very common among schools nowadays, is the problem of Huck Finn and books that include the N-word and how white teachers and majority of white classes address that. And so if we're going to read a book about, if we're going to reintroduce material to educate ourselves about racial microaggressions and the way that racism has manifested itself from the past to the present, I think that encouraging students and non-Black teachers to participate in those same microaggressions that you're trying to, I guess, bring upon is definitely backfires. And I've seen and experienced that Black kids throughout the years have expressed their uncomfortability with white teachers saying the N-word while reading the books and encouraging their students to say the N-word while reading those books. But the teachers brush off when we approach them with how we feel uncomfortable and how we don't want to do that, they brush that off. And my problem with that is, one, as a non-Black person, I don't think that even if you're a teacher, that it's necessarily your place to tell a Black person, and especially when you're the one or two, there's only one or two Black people in the whole class, how you should feel when the N-word and other racial slurs and very deep racial discussions are being thrown out there. I think that those conversations need to be had. But two is that I guess they have until we had parents take action this year, there is not much sign of a will to change or a will to listen to what we had to say. And so I think that bringing the material and incorporating that into the curriculum has been helpful. It has had meaningful discussions, and it has been productive to a certain extent. I think that this also brings upon another big important issue is how we address those discussions. And it's important that to understand that as a Black person, there's many times where I'm the only Black person in the class, or there's no more than 3 of us. And so making it an uncomfortable discussion is not going to be productive in any means, whether it's white teachers and white students saying the N-word very loudly and very it's very clear that it's just a total different than the flow of what they're saying. Like they're just emphasizing the word. Or in history, when we talk about slavery and other Black movements, everyone turns and looks and makes that one Black kid feel uncomfortable. And so these are things that when I talk about the environment of Strake is that it's important to try to change that environment and understand what we're talking about and what is going on, even when it may be in the best interest of incorporating literature and incorporating material into the curriculum. I think that teachers also need to adjust their approach and kind of understand the position that they're coming from. Let's look at the other questions.
So if nobody has any follow-up questions, I think everyone here has our emails, right? From the Google or from the email, either email Ben, me, or Zion. We'll all free to answer questions. I know if you talk to Mr. Azine or Mr. Chris, they'll be able to talk to you about the administration. If we could do another meeting like this, of course, we'll get in contact with y'all. Y'all will hear about it. Zion, Ben, anything else to say?
I know some people who have asked questions have talked about this. If there is an interest in kind of finding reading materials specifically for dealing with this in our daily lives, for dealing with it in the kind of institutional environments that we were talking about, if there is interest in that, I think the 3 of us can definitely put together some of those resources as well, because we've emphasized the importance of educating yourself and reading, and we'd love to help you find those materials. They are out there as well, and I think that's something that's important. But if you're interested in that, maybe shoot us an email or something like that, and we'd be happy to help with that. Mr. Azine, do you have something?
Sure.
If you're interested in having difficult conversations, since I've been reading and studying this stuff for about over a decade, I have resources and books that might be very helpful to you indeed. So if you're interested in that angle of it, how do you have these hard conversations without things blowing up, I might have some insights about that. I'd be happy to give you the references if you like, make a presentation if there's a desire for that at some point in the future. Thank you guys for organizing this. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. See you later. Have a safe weekend.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Continue the discussion at home. Keep reading. Try to help the movement if you can. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend.
Thanks you guys so much. And I'm glad that I was on the debate. I just happened to be on the debate Facebook page. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known about this. And I really appreciate being able to come and want to continue this, boys. I don't want this to die today. Merv, Jerry, please include me. And you boys, please include me. I want to make a difference on our campus. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
You know, Zion and Ben, if you guys, we can check with the administration about, having you make a presentation. I don't mind checking, probably through the Black Student Union, right? I would imagine. I think Coach Carroll is the moderator for the Black Student Union. And we could reach out to him. I think if that's something that interests you, just let me know if you want me to be an intermediary or if you want to reach out to him directly. I think the administration would be amenable. I think that the race relations on campus that you guys are talking about, I think that those are really pertinent issues that need to be addressed, right? So, getting a dialogue going, especially getting a dialogue going with the administration would be good. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Christ.
Yeah, sure. All right, take care, boys.
You too.
All right. Well, if anyone has any other questions, I think we're about ready to end the meeting. Any final? Oh, yeah.
I'm so sorry to interject. You guys did such an amazing job. I just wanted to say, for the sake of the recording, because they will not see the chat, that I mentioned in the chat that I had sent a letter to Strake requesting banning Confederate flags on campus, as well as use of the N-word even in literature like Huck Finn. And my suggestion in the chat is for as many parents as possible to send that same email, including whatever else you'd like to the Strake administration. So for those watching this recording, that's something that I'm happy to share with you, what I wrote to the school, and would love to see a change in that way. And I think it takes the parents banding together requesting change. So I just wanted to make sure that made it in the recording. Really good job, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to say thank you to you boys and to the white teachers and parents. We need you to use your privilege to help us move this forward. And so thank you so much.
My dad recommended me some podcasts. There's one called Code Switch and White Fragility. It's a book. He said it provides a powerful message. And to educate yourself, you should definitely listen to it.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody coming. We're very thankful that everybody got on the call and was willing to sit here on a Saturday morning and listen to us. We think it's definitely important. We also appreciate all of your questions, all of your suggestions, everything like that. It's super helpful, and it's great to hear that everybody's getting involved in the ways that they can. Other than that, email us if you have any questions. We're happy to answer any questions you have, but that's all we have. So thank you for joining. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Take care.